The third paper is by Daniel Rabetti about non-information asymmetry benefits of relationship lending. Daniel?
Such a long name. Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you for the organizers for having, giving me the opportunity to present my work. I'm a fourth-year PhD student with Tel Aviv University. I'm visiting Cornell. So I'm in the job market this year. If anybody here is hiring, let's have a chat. We're going to be talking about... Thank you. I got your tip from the break. So we're going to be looking to the paycheck protection programs and how relationship lending affects some of these outcomes. The paper is a little bit provocative, so don't take that personally. Here we go. Well, what we know from relationship lending, the basics is that banks ex ante cannot observe the true credit quality of their borrowers, so they will put some screening into place in order to mitigate symmetric information. And once that loan is ongoing, it's going to monitor the borrower incentives to invest optimally. In that, as relationship evolves through time, it turns out to generate some benefits for both sides, borrowers and lenders. Now, this is the usual setting when we're talking about commercial loan. It's interesting to see whether relationship lending has some effects during a financial rescue program, such as a paycheck protection program, where actually banks are working as intermediary and the funds are coming from the Federal Reserve. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to look into whether we can find some benefits, also some costs, and then try to understand if there's any motivation that is behind this economic channel. So the Paycheck Protection Program is a great laboratory for examining these issues. First, because there's no asymmetric information in the loan, it's backed by the Federal Reserve. There's no restriction on the borrower's risk, and there's no collaterals and no covenants. Also, in one hand, it could be that the lenders will be favoring their clients because they want look into some future opportunities or business with those clients. Or it could be also that one of the reasons is to mitigate some existing default risk from pre-crisis. On the other hand, it can also be an opportunity for those banks to attract new customers. So we're going to be looking to how that's play out, which is essentially an empirical question. So there's some evidence for favoritism that came out on the media after the program was essentially implemented, mostly relating to large firms that actually borrow from the program. And again, the program was designed for small firms. And you can see that some of those firms pay dividends, buy back stocks after getting the loans. Some of them, such as in the hotel or the restaurant industry, they were early receiving those funds in the first phase of the program, which just lasts for 2 weeks, and 90% of the applicants were left out until the Congress actually approved them for the second phase. And even Lakers got $4.6 million. We're gonna look in those public firms mostly. It's about 1,000 firms got to these PPP loans. Because they disclose and the disclosure are quite similar, they can look into who is the lender, when they got the loans for, and it's also other characteristics of those firms that are public available. And we're gonna look into whether these firms are taking the loan from a bank they have a relationship with in the past, or if it is just a transaction loan. We're gonna also confirm some of the results, looking to a large extensive data set on private firms that was released later by the SBA. We want to be able to provide evidence for all the features looking to public firms due to limitations with formation of private firms. So here's the distribution of the funds. We'll have this red square just to call your attention to those big tables. We can see the publicly listed firms are mostly on the top exchanges. The distribution of the funds are the top 3 states are California, Texas, and New York. Perhaps it does not make much sense to have New York in third because New York was heavily affected by the COVID-19 crisis. We're gonna see also some industries, as I said, retail, health, and restaurants are gonna be top there. And JP Morgan, Silicon Valley, and Bank of America are gonna be among of the top lenders for public firms. There's some delay on this. We're gonna compare relationship lending for borrowers characteristics with transaction borrowers. And I want to point out that those parameters that are often taken into consideration in a credit quality analysis, such as leverage, profitability, liquidity, they do not play a big role here. there's no significant differences across these two groups, at least when they are getting the PPP loan. So you're gonna use this for empirical research design. 4 variables that you want to look into. The first one is the size of the loan, or how relationship lending affect the size. The second characteristic is how the relationship lending affects the velocity in which these firms receive the PPP loan. And then we're going to look into some costs. Some of these firms, we could call them non-compliers because they had, for instance, some basic rules on the PPP loan was to not have more than 500 employees. And we're going to see also whether relationship lending has any influence on these firms to pay back those loans once there's some public outcry and the SBA provided further guidance telling those firms to return the loans. Now we're going to control for several characteristics on the firm side. We're going to also control for the lender characteristics we're going to see in a moment. Also industry and fixed effects and state fixed effects. Of course, COVID-19 affects states differently and across industry also differently. You're going to have bank fixed effects, just to be like my colleagues that presented before. So do banks favor relationship borrowers when there is no information asymmetry? A way of rephrasing that question is, are there relationship lending benefits in the Paycheck Protection Program? The first thing we're going to see is we're going to focus on this indicator variable for relationship lending, or relationship borrower, sorry. We're going to have control, we're going to control for some characteristics, including employees, because the PPP loan was mostly determined by the payroll size. You're going to have some controls for lenders, for instance, whether the lender has experience in a SBA platform, and you're going to have the industry fixed effects. Across different specifications of the model, we have an outcome that relationship borrowers receive between 20 and 25% larger loans than transaction borrowers. And this is after controlling for employee size, for instance. You're going to also look into whether there is some composition effects, and we're going to have a subset of the sample of firms that are listed only in top exchange, and the results still remain. So the second aspect that we're going to look into is how relationship lending affects velocity, on how quick these firms receive the PPP loan. And here we're seeing the days. Also across the specifications, there's on average 4 days early receiving these funds. You may think that 4 days is something that's not important, but let's talk about COVID-19 crisis, April 2020, where funds for this program was exhausted in 2 weeks. And 9% of the applicants had to wait Congress to approve for the second phase. So it's very important for relationship borrowers to have access to these loans as early as possible. For the public firms, about 42 firms that triggered some extreme negative events, such as breach of covenants, being delisted for exchanges, or have to file for bankruptcy. So velocity is a quite important element. Now we're going to have some validity and robustness tests here, in which we're going to look what happens for private firms. We cannot access all those effects here because we have a limitation with data availability. So we're going to look only on the loan size. And again, private firms, they benefit a lot, way more than public firms from relationship lending. They will have access to more funds. That also holds when you're having some more sophisticated techniques as matching samples just for robustness. So we have several other specifications that we try to see whether the results holds, and indeed holds when you are scaling loan size by number of employees and many other things. Here, perhaps to be more interesting, you're going to see that these effects of relationship lending did happen in the first phase. In the second phase, there's not much effect, and that's mostly attributed because there was not much clarity on the PPP rules when it just came out. So overall, the evidence shows that there are benefits of relationship lending in the PPP program. It appears in the form of larger loans and faster approvals. So what we're going to do now, we're going to try to examine whether there's other channels, economic channels driving these results that we got. One thing you're going to look into, or at least 2 things that you're going to look into, is whether these relationship lending effects are being driven by banks looking to future opportunities for those customers, or if there's something related to trying to mitigate default risk. We put a little bit more emphasis on the second because when we start examining it and separating the effects between lending accounts and deposit accounts, we see that lending accounts drive most of the results for when the effect is on loan size. The same happens when you're looking to effects on velocity. So lending accounts seems to particularly be something that's driving these results. We're going to do more, and we're going to look into the pre-crisis characteristics between firms that take the PPP loan and those that did not take. And you're going to see that some of the characteristics such as profitability, liquidity, and solvency are worse for these firms that took the PPP loan. So there's some component here of default that is playing a role. To finalize our examination, we're going to look into what happens to probability to default on existing debt before the crisis. And when you compare PPP firms, the firms that took the loan versus those that did not take, and within the group that take the loan, relationship lending versus transaction firms, you're going to see that relationship lending firms are driving most of these default probabilities. So altogether, we have some evidence that there's some one possible economic channel could be that this favoritism is driven by the lending concerns of the firm's default risk, which we call it evergreening motivation. Finally, we're going to look also into costs, and that was the provocative part. So now we're going to look into costs and whether there's some effects on true relationship lending channel. The first thing you're going to look into is whether relationship lending firm is more likely to violate the PPP loan rules, such as having more than 500 employees. And this is what we find. Relationship lending borrowers, they were more likely to violate those rules. That's in part also because the SBA and the programs organized did not provide much information when the program came out. We do take that into consideration. And in favor of the lenders, when there's more outcry from the public and when that information about that the large firms should return the loan earlier because that was designed for small firms, actually relationship lending helps here. So those firms, they are more likely to return and to pay the PPP loan earlier than transaction firms. And again, this is the PPP loan is a forgiver. We can ask for forgiveness, so they pay it. All right, so I think I'm concluding here, and I still have 2 minutes. The main conclusions of the paper is, I understand the paper may be provocative, even more for this audience, is to show that relationship lending is very important for during times of crisis. Borrowers will have access to larger loans, they will have access to quick approvals. However, there might be also implications that we should think about, hopefully not so soon, but if you go through another crisis or another financial rescue program, which part we could be actually improving here. And this has to do with this evergreening element of our results. Especially in two areas. First is that no relationship borrowers, they move down the waiting line. When you're talking about here numbers, but you see people closing businesses, is something that you should think about. 90% of the applicants did not reach on time access to these funds. And the second element is that when the bank is using the financial resources from a rescue program, what one could consider to favor relationship borrowers, that transfers part of the pre-crisis debt risk to the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve. So we should ask ourselves whether we could improve that moving further. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present my work. I'm looking forward to the discussion, comments, and to the audience. Thank you.